Hello, dear viewers of my channel Past Inside Out. Today I have prepared a story for you that reminds us not to judge people by their appearance or the clothes they wear. It teaches us to respect others, not to stay silent in the face of injustice, and to always remain humane. They left me waiting on a wooden bench meant for couriers, having no idea that soon every one of them would realize the mistake they had just made. You know what hurts the most? It's not the humiliation itself, it's how effortlessly people inflict it, how naturally they brush aside anyone who doesn't fit into their picture of a perfect world. I walked into the reception area of Hayes & Partners law firm slowly but confidently. Under my arm was a worn leather folder I had carried with me for 15 years, the same one I brought to my very first interview. Back then, they told me too that I didn't look like I belonged. The meeting had been scheduled in advance, 11 o'clock sharp. I'm never late. Punctuality isn't just a habit for me, it's a matter of respect for other people's time. But when I approached the front desk, the young receptionist didn't even lift her head. She was typing something on her keyboard, her face clearly showing that she wasn't simply busy, she was deliberately ignoring me. I waited. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Finally, without stopping her typing, she muttered through her teeth. "Ma'am, interviews for cleaning staff are through the service entrance. 3rd floor, to the right. Ask for Mrs. Henderson. But before we continue, tell us, where are you watching from? We'd love to know how far our stories reach." Her tone was so condescending that a few employees in the background exchanged glances and smirked. Someone even chuckled. I saw a young assistant, her nameplate read, Sarah, nudge a colleague and whisper something that made him snort. I didn't say a word. I simply took out my phone and turned the screen toward the receptionist, showing her the confirmation email, the time, the date, and the signature of Paul Mitchell, the senior partner. The girl, her badge said Emily, glanced at the screen briefly, very briefly. For a split second, I caught a flicker of doubt in her eyes, but it vanished instantly, replaced by the same cold indifference. "Oh," she said flatly. "It must be a system error. It happens sometimes. Please wait over there." She pointed to the waiting area, 2 wooden benches by the window, clearly meant for couriers and minor visitors, not for clients, for those deemed unworthy of the soft chairs in the main lounge. I nodded and walked toward the bench. Inside, everything tightened into a hard knot, not from fear or even resentment, but from anticipation, because I knew exactly what was coming. They didn't. I sat down on the hard wood, clutching the folder to my chest, lowering my eyes. The classic posture of someone who's been put in their place. Submission. Compliance. But inside? Inside I was terrifyingly calm, like a predator before the leap. Employees hurried back and forth. Sarah passed by with a tall stack of folders, giving me a quick, judgmental glance. Then came a young man in a fitted suit, his hair neatly styled and sides shaved clean. His badge read, Tom, legal assistant. He stopped for a moment, staring at me. Our eyes met. And I saw, he recognized me. Of course he did. How could he not? I had been at his baptism. I held him in my arms when he was 3 months old. I attended his college graduation, though I sat in the last row, out of sight. Tom took a step toward me. His hand twitched slightly as if he wanted to say something. I gave him the faintest shake of my head. Our agreement was clear. At work, we were strangers. He had to build his career on his own, without my help, without any favoritism. Otherwise, he'd forever be known as Margaret Hayes' godson, not simply Tom, the lawyer. He froze. I could see 2 emotions battling in his eyes, the urge to stand up for me and the awareness of our unspoken rule. "Tom," Sarah called out, "are you coming or what?" He flinched, turned sharply, and walked away quickly. But I saw the tension in his shoulders, his clenched fists. It hurt. Not because of Emily's disdain, but because my godson was now enduring a painful moral test. And I couldn't help him. This was his lesson, his exam. The clock read 11:07. Only 7 minutes had passed since I arrived. 2 men in business suits stopped nearby, one around 50, with gray at his temples, the other younger, but with the same arrogant expression. "What's she doing here?" the younger one murmured.
"No idea," the older replied. "She clearly doesn't belong. Probably lost or looking for a job."
They didn't even bother to lower their voices, as if I were part of the furniture, an inanimate object unworthy of courtesy. I held the folder tighter against my chest, lowering my eyes even more, playing the perfect victim of circumstance. But in my head, I was counting. 11:10, 11:15, 11:20. They had no idea, how could they, that I hadn't set foot in this office for over 8 years. All matters had been handled through my representatives, video meetings, signed documents delivered by couriers, digital signatures. Why? Because after my husband died, I couldn't bring myself to come here. Every corner of this building screamed his name. We had built this firm together, chose the furniture together, hung the logo above the entrance together. And then he died. Suddenly. An aortic rupture. He was only 42. And so I left. Not the business, just these walls, because I couldn't breathe here without him. But the recent merger with the major law firm changed everything. New people had joined the company, new employees who had never seen me or my husband. For them, Hayes and Partners law firm was just another workplace, not a legacy, not a memory, just an office. And now I had come back to see what had become of what we once built. 11:35. Sarah, the same young assistant who had whispered with her colleagues earlier, approached me. Her face bore a look of professional politeness, though barely concealing irritation underneath. "Excuse me," she began in a tone people use when explaining something to a child. "But it seems there's been a mix-up with your appointment." She crouched down in front of me, a gesture meant to look friendly, but in reality, it only emphasized her superiority. As if I were so far below her that she needed to physically lower herself to my level. "Could you clarify the purpose of your visit?" she asked, glancing at her phone where notifications were clearly flashing. "You see, we only take corporate clients. There are other law offices in the city for private individuals, more affordable ones. I can give you some addresses if you'd like." There was no open rudeness in her words. It was worse. A sticky, suffocating condescension that made me want to scream. I stayed quiet and just looked at her. My silence started to make her uneasy, because she straightened up, smoothed her skirt, and added in a colder tone. "In any case, our fees start at around $3,200 per case. If you're looking for a free consultation, there's a legal clinic at New York University. They can help you there." $3,200. As if I didn't know the pricing of the firm I helped create. As if I hadn't personally approved those very fee lists. Before I could respond, Emily at the reception desk waved her hand and called out loudly. "Mark! Mark, could you come here, please?" Out from the hallway came a security guard, a big man in his mid-40s with a military posture and a scar above his eyebrow. Mark. I knew his story. A former soldier. Came back from war broken, not physically, but emotionally. He couldn't find a job. No one wanted to hire a man with post-traumatic stress disorder. 3 years ago, a charity foundation helped him, paid for his retraining courses, helped with the paperwork, found him employment. Mark still didn't know that I was the one who had funded that program personally, out of my own money. And now he was walking toward me, to escort me out. "Mark," Emily said casually, gesturing toward me, "please help this woman find where she's supposed to be. Looks like she's at the wrong place." Mark approached, but, unlike the others, didn't rush. He studied me carefully, and I could see something in him resisting, the intuition of a seasoned soldier who could sense when something didn't add up. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "maybe I should help you find where you're going? Or perhaps we should double-check your appointment?" I looked at him and spoke very quietly, so only he could hear me. "I have a confirmed meeting with the board of directors, 11 o'clock sharp. Margaret Hayes. Check the schedule. Carefully." Something changed in his face. He straightened up as if he'd heard a command. "Right away," he said firmly, and headed to the desk. But Emily had already grown tired of the scene. She rolled her eyes. Mark, come on. We've got real clients waiting. Important people. Hurry up. I need to check, he said firmly. What's there to check? Emily snapped. You can see she's not. She didn't finish because at that moment, a tall woman in her mid-30s, dressed in a sharp pantsuit, stepped out of the hallway. One of the senior attorneys. Her badge read, Catherine Reed, Senior Attorney. What's going on here? She asked coldly, scanning the scene. We've got a meeting with a major client in 10 minutes, and you're holding a circus at the reception desk. Emily, is this part of your job description? Emily flushed. This woman's been sitting here for a half an hour and… And what? Catherine cut her off, her tone cutting, eyes coldly assessing me. Who are you? I stood up, slowly, not with anger, with a calm so steady that several people in the lobby looked visibly uneasy. I saw Tom, standing by the far wall with a folder in his hands, go pale. I'm someone who came for a scheduled meeting, I said evenly, and who's been kept waiting in the courier zone for 38 minutes. Your name? Catherine pulled out her phone. I could have said it, right then, one word, and this entire performance would have been over. But something stopped me. A quiet curiosity, a need to see just how far they would go, how deep they'd sink. Check the schedule for 11 o'clock, I said calmly. Meeting with the board of directors. Catherine frowned and scrolled through her phone. Then her face changed. There's only, she hesitated, there's only Margaret Hayes, the new partner after the merger. But you can't be… Silence. The kind of silence where even a car passing outside sounds loud. Emily slowly stood up from behind the desk. Sarah froze, her mouth open. Catherine turned pale. So pale, her lips went white. I said nothing. I just looked at each of them, one by one. Long. Steady. Then I turned and walked toward the exit. Wait! Catherine rushed after me. Ms. Hayes, please, I'm so sorry. This is all a misunderstanding. We can… I stopped by the door, turned around. A misunderstanding? I repeated softly. A misunderstanding is when someone accidentally misspells your name in a document. This, my eyes swept over the reception area. This is a system. A system that decides a person's worth by their appearance in 3 seconds. We'll fix it, Catherine stammered quickly. Please, come upstairs. The board of directors is waiting. Let them wait, I replied, just like I did. And I left. The door closed softly behind me. From inside came the sounds of panic, raised voices, hurried footsteps, phones ringing. You know what's most interesting? They still didn't grasp the depth of the problem. They thought it was just an awkward moment, a little incident. We'll apologize, smooth things over, move on. They had no idea this morning's scene was just the tip of the iceberg. Because in 2 hours, I would discover that none of it was accidental. Someone had been deliberately creating an atmosphere in this company, one where people were judged by how they looked, where clients were divided into our kind and not our kind, where respect was a privilege, not a norm. And that someone was sitting on the board of directors. But that would come later. For now, I stood outside, pulling out my phone. I had exactly 3 phone calls to make, and they would change everything. Stay with me, because what comes next is where things get truly interesting. While I stood at the entrance dialing my assistant, chaos was erupting inside. Mark, still holding the tablet with the schedule, slowly raised his head and looked at Emily. There was no anger in his eyes, something worse, disappointment. Do you even realize what you've done? He asked quietly. Emily's hands trembled as she grabbed the phone. I didn't know. How was I supposed to know? She what? Mark leaned over the counter. She didn't look the way you expected, so that gave you the right to be rude? I wasn't rude, Emily's voice cracked. I just thought, who knows who comes in here? We have policies. Policies, Mark repeated bitterly. Our policy now is to judge people by their clothes, huh? Sarah, standing nearby, suddenly collapsed into a chair and covered her face. That's it. We're finished. All of us. I'm going to get fired. Oh God, I've got a mortgage. I've only made 2 payments. Shut up, Sarah, Emily snapped, but her voice was shaking. You're not the only one. Catherine stood in the middle of the lobby, frantically dialing numbers. Busy tone. Again, busy. Peter Lawson's not answering, she nearly shouted. Neither is Paul Mitchell. They're in the meeting. They're waiting for her, and she left, Tom said quietly. He had been standing by the wall the whole time, gripping his folder so tightly his knuckles had turned white. His face was emotionless, but inside, I knew he was tearing himself apart. I should have stepped in. I should have said something. To hell with our agreement. To hell with the idea of building a career without help. I should have just done what was right. Catherine turned sharply toward him. Tom, you're a smart guy. Think fast. Go after her. Apologize. Beg her to come back. I don't care how. Just get her back here. Tom flinched but didn't move. He looked as if he wanted to run, but his legs refused to obey. He started. What are you doing? Catherine grabbed his shoulder. Go, now! She won't come back, Tom said quietly. Not now, and not because you ask her to. How would you know? Tom looked her straight in the eye. I just know. At that very moment, the phone on the reception desk rang violently. Emily, trembling all over, picked up the receiver. Hello, Hayes in part. She didn't finish. A furious voice thundered from the other end so loudly that even people 3 meters away could hear every word. Where is Margaret Hayes? It was the voice of Peter Lawson, the Director of Human Resources. The man who never raised his voice, known for his icy calm and his talent for resolving conflicts diplomatically. And now he was screaming so fiercely that Emily's hand shook. She was here, but... What do you mean, was here? The board of directors has been waiting 40 minutes. We have a strategy presentation scheduled. Where is she? She left, Emily managed to whisper. The silence on the other end was worse than the shouting. Then, very quietly, repeat that. She left. We didn't know it was her, and... Emily didn't finish. The call ended abruptly. And 5 seconds later, the door to the boardroom on the 4th floor burst open with such force that the windows rattled. Peter Lawson stormed out as if set on fire. Behind him came Paul Mitchell, his face beet red, and Andrew Cooper, one of the firm's founding partners. Andrew looked as if someone had punched him in the gut. He was pale, his lips moving soundlessly. How could this even happen? Paul was shouting as he charged down the stairs 2 at a time. How is this possible? They rushed into the lobby. Peter, ignoring everyone else, went straight to Emily. His face was completely white. Tell me everything, word for word. What happened? Emily tried to speak, but her voice broke. The words tangled, her breathing hitched. I didn't know. She looked... I thought... We have rules. What rules? Paul exploded. What kind of damn rules tell you to humiliate someone at the door? I wasn't rude. Shut up! He roared so loudly that Emily jumped. Andrew, still silent, slowly walked to the window, looked down. There, on the street, Margaret Hayes was on the phone. Calm. Too calm. She's making calls, he said quietly. Calling her people. So what? Paul frowned, not understanding. Andrew turned, fear flickering in his eyes, the real, gut-level kind. You don't understand. Margaret Hayes isn't just a new partner. She's the wife of Michael Hayes, the man who founded this firm, the man who built it from the ground up, and she... His voice trembled. She hasn't stepped foot in this building for 8 years, because she couldn't. Because every corner here reminded her of him.
Silence. And today, Andrew continued. Today she finally walked through those doors again. Do you know why? Not for money, not for power. To see what had become of her husband's life's work. He looked around at all of them, and the first thing she saw? They sent her to sit in the courier waiting area, like trash. Paul collapsed into a chair, covering his face with his hands. Peter stood motionless, frozen. Then Tom suddenly turned and walked quickly toward the exit. "Where are you going?" Sarah called after him. "To do what I should have done an hour ago." He threw over his shoulder and rushed out of the office. He burst onto the street, breathless.
Margaret Hayes was still standing near the entrance, but she had already put her phone away. She turned toward him. Their eyes met. "Miss Hayes," Tom began, gasping. She lifted her hand to stop him. "Not now, Tom." "But I have to." "I know what you have to do," she interrupted gently. "And I understand why you didn't do it before. That was your choice. Now isn't the time to discuss it." She stepped closer, placing her hand on his shoulder, and spoke very softly, just for him. "When we go back upstairs, you'll make the right choice, all right?" Tom swallowed hard and nodded. Margaret glanced at her watch. 12:05. I'll give them another 30 minutes. Let them stew in their own panic, and then... She smiled, but it was a cold smile. "Then we'll talk. Seriously." I returned precisely at 12:35, not a minute earlier, not a minute later. Punctuality isn't just respect for others' time, it's also a demonstration of control. They were nervous, panicking, making calls, while I remained calm, steady as a rock in the middle of a storm. 3 people came in with me, my personal assistant, Laura, a woman in her 40s, holding a tablet, her gaze sharp as steel, 2 attorneys from an external firm specializing in corporate audits, and 1 more person no one expected to see, Richard Stevens, a member of the board of directors of Global Legal Group Inc., the parent company after the merger. His presence meant one thing. This wasn't just an angry partner's outburst. This was an official audit, with consequences. When we entered the reception area, the silence was suffocating. Emily sat behind the desk, pale as chalk, her eyes red from crying. Sarah stood by the wall, nervously twisting the hem of her blouse. Mark was at the door, standing at attention like a soldier. Catherine jumped from her chair. "Miss Hayes, I walked past her without a glance. Not out of spite. I simply had no time for emotion. I had work to do. The elevator. 4th floor. A hallway carpeted in burgundy. The door to the boardroom. I pushed it open without knocking. Inside sat 6 people. Paul Mitchell, the senior partner, his face gray with stress. Andrew Cooper, the co-founder, the man who had once worked side by side with my late husband. Peter Lawson, the HR director, now looking as if he hadn't slept in 3 days. And 3 representatives from the company we'd merged with. They all stood as I entered. "Sit down," I said curtly. They obeyed like school children. I walked to the head of the table, the place where whoever leads the meeting usually sits. I laid my folder on the table and nodded to Laura. She turned on the projector. The first slide appeared on the screen. Over the past 3 months, I began without preamble, 18 employees have left this firm. For an organization of your size, that's a critical turnover rate. Among those who left were 7 experienced specialists whose departures caused direct financial damage. Click. Next slide. The company's average rating on professional job platforms dropped from 4.7 to 3.1. The primary complaints? Toxic corporate culture, disrespectful management, and lack of career growth. Peter tried to interject, but I raised a hand. "Please don't interrupt. Questions later." Next slide. During the same period, the firm lost 4 major clients. The reasons stated in their letters, and I quote, "unsatisfactory service quality and arrogant employee behavior." I paused, letting the words sink in. But the most interesting part, I continued, is the internal correspondence provided to me by several former employees. Laura switched to the next slide. Screenshots of a corporate chat filled the screen, with Peter Lawson's messages among them. We don't need clients showing up in jeans. We have standards. If someone can't afford a suit worth $1,000, they're not our client. Emily, next time someone comes in looking out of place, send them through the service entrance. I don't want our VIP clients seeing that kind of riffraff in the lobby. The silence in the room was so thick you could hear someone swallow. Peter turned pale. He tried to speak, but only a rasp came out. That's taken out of context, he finally muttered. Context? I met his eyes. Then let's hear the full context, shall we? I nodded to Laura, who played an audio recording. Peter's voice filled the room. A recording from one of his management meetings. Listen, our goal is to create an atmosphere of exclusivity. People should understand, if you're here, you're among the elite. And if you can't afford our services, go to some firm on the ground floor of a residential building. We're premium. Everyone who walks through these doors should feel that, even if they're just a courier, a cleaner, whoever. They need to know their place. I stopped the recording. Is that your context, Peter Lawson? He said nothing. Paul looked away. Andrew sat with his face in his hands. Did you know about this? I asked Andrew quietly. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes were full of tears. I suspected something was wrong, Andrew said quietly. But I thought it was just discipline, tough management. They told me after the merger we had to raise the bar, become more competitive. Competitive, I repeated. At the expense of humiliating people? He didn't answer. I looked around the table at everyone. This morning, I didn't come here on a whim. I came to see what had become of the company my husband built from nothing. The firm he poured not just money, but his soul into. He believed that legal aid should never be a privilege of the rich. It should be a right for everyone. I placed my hand on the folder in front of me. Do you know what's inside this folder? The very first case our company ever took, 23 years ago. We defended an elderly woman who was being evicted from her apartment by scammers. She had no money, none. We took the case for free, and we won. Do you know what she gave us in return? I opened the folder and took out an old, yellowed photograph. I handed it to Andrew. In the photo, a young woman, me, 23 years ago, and a man in a suit, my husband, Michael Hayes, stood beside an elderly woman. All three were smiling. In the background, a tiny office, our firm's very first space. She baked us a pie, I said softly. Brought it to the office and said, "Thank you for not looking at me as a burden. Thank you for seeing me as a person." Andrew looked at the photo, tears streaming down his face. Michael always said, I continued, that a lawyer's true strength isn't in defending the wealthy. The wealthy can defend themselves. Real strength is in protecting those who can't. I took the photo back and placed it carefully into the folder. And today I learned that the firm bearing his name has turned into an exclusive club, where people are divided into our kind and not our kind, where respect has become a privilege, something you have to earn through appearance and wealth. Richard Stevens, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Miss Hayes, what do you propose? I met his eyes. A full reorganization, new client service standards, training for all staff, and personnel decisions. What kind of decisions? He clarified. I turned toward Peter Lawson. You, Mr. Lawson, have systematically built a toxic culture within this company. I have proof of your conversations with a competing firm where you discussed plans to devalue the company from within so you could later buy out a share through a proxy. He shot up from his chair. That's a lie. Sit down, I ordered coldly. Laura started another recording. Peter's unmistakable voice filled the room. You see, if I create the right atmosphere, drive turnover, ruin the reputation, they'll want to sell on their own. And we'll buy it for next to nothing. The old folks don't get it. Business is war. Peter collapsed back into his chair. You have a choice, I said calmly. Either you resign quietly, take your severance and sign a non-disclosure and non-compete agreement for 5 years, or I send these materials to law enforcement and let them handle it. He sat motionless, breathing heavily. Well? The first one, he croaked. Wise choice. Laura, prepare the paperwork. I turned to the rest of the board. As for the others, Emily, Sarah, and Catherine Reed, they acted under the culture you imposed, Mr. Lawson. That doesn't excuse them, but it does mitigate their responsibility. Paul Mitchell spoke cautiously. And what happens to them? Retraining, I replied. Workshops on client service and corporate ethics. 3-month probation. If they fail, they're out. If they succeed, they stay. And you? Andrew Cooper asked softly. What will you do, Ms. Hayes? I looked at him for a long moment. I'm staying. I have to rebuild what's been broken. Bring back the soul my husband gave this company. Andrew nodded, wiping his tears. Meeting adjourned, I said. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., a general meeting with all employees. Laura will send the agenda. You're dismissed. Everyone began to rise. Then I added, Send Tom to my office. I need to speak with him. 5 minutes later, Tom walked in, his face pale, hands clenched into fists. He stopped by the door, unsure whether to step further inside. Close the door, I said softly. He closed it and stepped toward the table, but didn't sit. Sit down, Tom. I'd rather stand. Please, sit. He sat on the edge of the chair, tense as a wire. I looked at him in silence. This boy, no, this man. I remembered him at 3 years old, racing around the apartment on a plastic toy car. At 10, when he first announced that he wanted to be a lawyer, like Uncle Michael. At his college graduation, when he received his diploma with honors and searched for me in the crowd. And today, he had stood just a few feet away while I was humiliated and said nothing. Are you angry with me? He asked quietly. No, I answered honestly. I'm not angry. I'm disappointed. He flinched as if I had struck him. We agreed that at work you'd stand on your own, I continued. It was the right agreement. It helped you grow as a professional, not as Margaret Hayes' godson. But Tom, I stood and walked to the window. There are things more important than a career. There are moments when you must choose not between your job and your pride, but between what's right and what's wrong. I know, his voice trembled. I keep asking myself why I didn't step in. And you know what's scariest? I can't find a good reason. The only thing I can think of is, I got scared. I turned to him. You weren't scared. You froze. There's a difference. What difference does it make? A big one. Being scared means you knew the right thing but feared the consequences. Freezing means you didn't yet understand what was right. That's normal, Tom. You're young. You're still learning. He shook his head. No, I knew. Deep down, I knew something was wrong, but He fell silent. What? I asked gently. I thought that if I interfered, everyone would find out about our connection. And then everything I've achieved here, they'd think it was all because of you. Not because of my work or skill, just because I'm your godson. He lifted his eyes to me. And you know what? The moment I realized that, I felt so ashamed. Because it meant I chose my pride, my ego, instead of doing the decent thing and standing up for you. I returned to the table and sat across from him. Tom, you did something important today. Not this morning, later, at the meeting. When you raised your hand and admitted you'd stayed silent, that it was wrong. That takes courage. Far more courage than reacting in the heat of the moment. But if I'd spoken up right away, then you wouldn't have learned the lesson. Now you have. And do you know what I see when I look at you? He shook his head. I see a lawyer who will defend people not because it's his job or because he's paid to, but because he's learned firsthand how painful silence can be when you should have spoken. Tom sat with his head down, shoulders trembling. I let you down. No, I said firmly. You let yourself down. But that's not the end of the story. It's the beginning. Now you know the kind of man you don't want to be, and that's worth a lot. I handed him the old leather folder. Open it. He opened it and saw the photograph. Is that your husband? He asked softly. Yes, that's Michael, your godfather. He died when you were 10. I remember him, Tom said, gently touching the photo. He always smiled, and no matter how busy he was, he always made time to talk to me. Do you know what he told me before he died? Tom shook his head. He said, Maggie, the most important thing is not to lose yourself. It doesn't matter how much money you have or what title you hold. What matters is whether you still see the human being in others. I took the folder back. Today, I almost lost that faith. When they treated me like some beggar, I thought, has everything Michael and I built turned into this? A club for snobs? But you didn't lose it, Tom said quietly. No, I smiled faintly, because I remembered, Michael wouldn't have lost it. He would have said, this isn't failure, it's a lesson. For you, for them, for everyone. Tom lifted his head. What should I do now? Work, learn, grow. And remember, true professionalism isn't just about knowing the law, it's also about humanity. He nodded. I won't let you down again. Tom, I smiled. It's not me you shouldn't let down. It's that little boy you once were. The one who wanted to be a lawyer to help people, not to fill his pockets. He stood up. Thank you, Miss Hayes. When he reached the door, I added, and Tom? We're good. Truly. He turned, smiled, for the first time that morning, and left. The next morning, at exactly 9 a.m., I walked into the large conference room on the 4th floor. All the firm's employees were there, from senior partners to interns and support staff. Emily sat in the 3rd row, pale, her eyes swollen from crying. Sarah was next to her, nervously twisting a tissue in her hands. Mark stood by the back wall, posture straight, like a soldier. Tom sat in the front row, his face serious. I stood before them, no podium, no microphone, just face to face. Good morning. My name is Margaret Hayes. Some of you know that name. For others, it's the first time you've heard it. So let's start from the beginning. I paused. 23 years ago, my husband, Michael Hayes, founded this firm. Together with Andrew Cooper and 2 other partners. I was a junior attorney back then. We rented a tiny office on the outskirts of the city, bought secondhand furniture, and relied on word of mouth to find clients. I smiled at the memory. For the first 6 months, we worked at a loss. We took on cases from people who couldn't pay us. We defended those who had no money even for proper legal advice. And do you know what Michael used to say when the accountant brought him another sheet of red numbers? Silence. He'd say, the money will come. But the reputation of people who don't walk past someone else's pain, that stays forever. I walked slowly along the 1st row. Over time, the firm grew. We won difficult cases. Clients recommended us. Soon, large companies with deep pockets came to us. We moved into this building, hired new people, became one of the top law firms in the city. I stopped. But Michael always repeated one rule. To everyone who came to work here, he'd say, it doesn't matter if the person in front of you is a millionaire or a grandmother living on a pension. You treat them with the same respect. Because if you don't respect people, you're not a lawyer. You're just a merchant selling the law. I returned to the center of the room. 8 years ago, Michael died. After that, I couldn't come here anymore. Every corner reminded me of him. I managed the firm remotely through representatives. I thought it was the right choice. My voice trembled slightly. But yesterday, I realized I made a mistake. I left, and when a leader leaves, someone else takes their place, and that person doesn't always share your values. I looked at the empty seat where Peter Lawson had sat the day before. Mr. Lawson no longer works at this firm, for reasons I explained to the board yesterday. This isn't punishment, it's necessity. Because his values no longer aligned with this company's values. My gaze turned to Emily. Yesterday, I was humiliated at the entrance of my own office, taken for someone who didn't fit your image of a client. And do you know what's most ironic? Emily shrank into her seat. I really don't fit, because your idea of a client was shaped by Mr. Lawson, and those are not the values this company was built on. I stepped closer to her. Emily, please stand up. She rose, trembling all over. Do you recognize me? She shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. But we've met before, 3 years ago, at the Children's Hospital. Your son was in intensive care. He needed an expensive surgery. You sat in the hallway, crying because you didn't have the money. Emily gasped, her eyes widening. A woman approached you, I continued. Said she worked for a charitable foundation that would cover the cost of the operation. Do you remember? Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. That woman was my assistant, and that foundation, it was mine. I paid for your son's operation, anonymously, because I believe help shouldn't require gratitude. The room fell silent. And yesterday, I said softly, yesterday you threw me out like a stray dog, without knowing who I was, without knowing what I had done for you. Emily covered her face with her hands, sobbing. But I'm not saying this to break you, Emily. I'm saying it so you understand. We never truly know who stands before us. Maybe it's just an ordinary person, or maybe it's someone who once saved your life, or someone whose life you'll save someday. I placed my hand gently on her shoulder. You're not a bad person. You were just following the rules someone else forced on you. But from now on, there will be different rules. I turned to address everyone in the room. Starting today, new standards are being introduced in this firm. Everyone who walks through these doors will be greeted with respect, no matter how they're dressed, no matter how much money they have. Respect isn't a privilege, it's a basic human right. Click. A presentation appeared on the screen. All employees will undergo training in the new client service standards. This isn't punishment, it's an investment in you, in this company, in our future. Next slide. We're reinstating our free legal aid program. 20% of our resources will be allocated to helping those who can't afford legal services. A murmur ran through the room. Someone started clapping, then another, and soon the entire hall joined in. I raised my hand for quiet. And one more thing. Hayes & Partners Law Firm will now operate as a partially social enterprise. 20% of our profits will go toward a charitable foundation that supports people in difficult life situations. This isn't altruism, it's our philosophy. I looked at the portrait of Michael Hayes hanging on the wall. Michael always said, success isn't measured by the size of your wallet, but by the number of people you've helped. It's time we remembered that. The hall erupted in applause. People stood. Emily approached me, crying, and hugged me. I hugged her back. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for my son. Thank you for this lesson. I patted her on the back. Now you understand. From now on, treat every person the way you'd want to be treated yourself. She nodded, wiping away tears. When the applause faded, I continued. Any questions? A hand went up. It was Tom. He stood. Ms. Hayes, I'd like to say something if I may. I nodded. He turned toward the audience. Yesterday morning, I witnessed what happened in the lobby. I saw everything, and I said nothing. The silence grew tense. I could have stepped in. I should have, but I didn't, because I was afraid. Afraid of what my colleagues might think. Afraid of the consequences for my career. Afraid of seeming weak or intrusive. He paused, looking down at the floor. But the worst part wasn't that. The worst part was that I found an excuse. I convinced myself it wasn't my business, that someone else would handle it, that I had no right to interfere. He lifted his gaze, and I saw determination in his eyes. But you know what? Silence is a choice too. And yesterday, I made the wrong one. I don't want to be the kind of person who looks away when someone is being wronged, even if it's inconvenient, even if it's risky. The room was completely still, everyone hanging on his words. Ms. Hayes gave me a second chance. She didn't fire me. She didn't humiliate me. She simply showed me that I could be better. And I will be. I promise myself, and all of you. He sat down. A few people started clapping, then more, until the entire hall was filled with applause again. I looked at him and felt proud. This was what a true lesson looked like. Not punishment, but realization. Not revenge, but growth. "Thank you, Tom," I said. "That was very brave." He nodded, and I saw the invisible weight lift from his shoulders. I scanned the room. Yesterday, I came back to this office for the first time in 8 years. You know what I feared most? Not humiliation, not conflict. I feared seeing that the place Michael and I built with love had become a cold corporation without a soul. My voice trembled, but I went on. And yes, yesterday I did see that. But I also saw Mark, who stopped to question and verify. I saw Tom, who struggled with his choice. I saw Emily, who isn't cruel, just lost in someone else's rules. I smiled. And today, I said quietly, I see people who are ready to change, and that gives me hope. I raised my hand, pointing toward the wall where the firm's code of ethics was displayed. See that text? Michael wrote it, 20 years ago. Let's read it together, out loud. Everyone turned toward the wall. Andrew Cooper stood and began reading in a steady, resonant voice. We believe that every person deserves justice. It doesn't matter who they are, where they come from, or how much money they have. Our mission is not to profit from others' pain, but to help people find a way out of difficult situations. A true lawyer isn't the one who knows every law by heart, but the one who remembers that behind every case stands a living human being, with pain, with hope, and with the right to dignity. When he finished, the room was completely silent. Many were wiping their eyes. This, I said softly, is our foundation. This is what we return to, starting today, right now. I nodded to Laura, who began handing out the new company booklets. These contain our updated standards. Study them. Apply them in your work. And if you ever have questions, my door is always open. Literally, I'm removing the doors from my office. Any employee can walk in and talk. A few gasps broke the silence. Yes, I confirmed. Anyone, from the janitor to the senior partner. Because hierarchy is about responsibility, not privilege. I glanced at the clock. One last thing. 2 weeks from now, we're holding an open house day. We'll invite anyone who's ever needed legal help but couldn't afford it. We'll give free consultations and take on several pro bono cases. I looked at Tom. Tom, you'll lead this initiative. Put together a volunteer team. He jumped up. Yes, of course. Thank you for trusting me. Don't thank me. Earn it. He nodded, glowing with pride. I took a step back. That's all. You're dismissed. Get back to work. And remember, starting today, we're not just a law firm. We're a place that helps people believe in justice again. People started leaving. Some came up to shake my hand, to thank me. Sarah approached quietly. Ms. Hayes, she said softly, I was wrong too, yesterday. I laughed, and I'm ashamed. I squeezed her hand. Sarah, what matters is that you understand that now. Go and be better. She nodded and left, wiping her tears. Mark came up last. He stood straight, shoulders squared. Ms. Hayes, permission to speak? Go ahead, Mark. 3 years ago, I was at rock bottom. I thought my life was over. No one needed me. Then someone from a foundation called, said they'd found me a job, helped with the paperwork, paid for my training. I never knew who was behind it. He met my eyes. Was it you? I nodded. He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. You saved my life, literally. If it weren't for that job, He stopped mid-sentence. You would have made it, Mark, I said gently. You're strong. I just gave you a chance to prove it. He straightened up even more. Permission to serve? I smiled. Serve, Mark, but not me. Serve the idea that everyone deserves a second chance. He nodded, turned, and left, wiping his eyes as he went. When everyone was gone, I was alone in the conference room. I walked to the window. Outside, people were hurrying about their day, laughing, talking on phones, lost in thought. Just regular people, with dreams, fears, and hopes. I took out my phone and opened the photo, the same one from the old folder. Michael was smiling at me from the screen. Michael, I whispered, I'm back. I'm sorry it took so long, but I'm here now, and I won't let what we built die. Behind me, a voice said, he would have been proud of you. I turned. Andrew Cooper stood in the doorway. You think so? I asked. He walked over and stood beside me by the window. I know, he said quietly. Michael always used to say, Maggie is the strongest person I know. She can do anything. She just sometimes forgets that. I smiled through tears. He really said that? All the time, Andrew Cooper replied, especially after tough cases. When you stayed up all night working through documents, preparing for court, he'd look at you and say, that's real strength. Not in shouting or anger, in perseverance and faith. We stood in silence for a moment. Ms. Hayes, Andrew said finally, turning toward me, I owe you an apology. I let Peter Lawson change this company. I didn't stop him. I thought strictness meant professionalism. You're not to blame, Andrew, I said gently. You just trusted the wrong person. But I should have seen it. Michael would have seen it. Michael was Michael, I said softly. He saw right through people. But we're not him. We can only try to live up to what he taught us. He nodded. What now? Now we rebuild, I said. We restore. We start over. Will you stay? For good? I looked around the office, at the people below, at Michael's portrait on the wall. Yes, I said. I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere. 3 months passed. The open house day exceeded all expectations. More than 200 people came. We provided 150 free consultations and took on 32 pro bono cases. Tom led the program, and he worked with such passion that I barely recognized the uncertain young man from that first day in the lobby. He found purpose and passed it on. Emily became the best front desk employee we'd ever had. She greeted every visitor with warmth and genuine care. One day, a homeless man came in asking for help. Some staff hesitated, but Emily personally walked him to a consultation room, brought him tea, and waited until a lawyer could see him. It turned out he had a legal right to an inheritance he didn't know about. We helped him claim it. A month later, he came back, clean, neatly dressed, holding the deed to his new apartment. He hugged Emily and wept. Sarah transferred to the pro bono department. She said she wanted to help those who truly needed it. Mark was still at the front entrance, but now he wasn't just a security guard, he was the first person people met. The first to offer a smile and the quiet assurance that they were in the right place. The company had changed, not overnight, not instantly, but steadily, step by step. Our employee ratings on job platforms rose to 4.9. Reviews read, finally, lawyers who see you as a person, not a wallet. Clients returned. New ones came through referrals. Profits increased by 30%, and every month, 20% of those profits went to the charity foundation. As for me, I sat in my office, the door always open. People came in to share their problems, ask for advice, or just talk. And every time I looked at Michael's portrait, I thought, Michael, we did it. We brought your dream back. If this story touched your heart and made you reflect on how important it is to see the person behind every face, no matter how they look or how much money they have, support us. Click the Super Thanks button, the little heart with the $sign below the video. Every time you do, you help us create stories that remind people respect isn't a privilege for the few, it's a right for everyone. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. Tell us in the comments, which moment moved you the most? Have you ever been judged by your appearance, or perhaps judged someone unfairly yourself? Subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you don't miss new stories about dignity, justice, and how a single choice can change everything. Like this video if you believe that everyone deserves a second chance, and the chance to be heard. And before you go, watch the story we've left for you on the screen. It's about a woman who proved that true strength isn't about loud words, it's about quiet acts. We're sure it will make you think, and maybe even change something in your life. See you in the next story.